The paper hit the puddle with a sound I'll never forget. Not a splash, not a thud, just a limp slap of dismissal, like my entire career had been folded in half and tossed out with the trash. I stood there frozen while Ryder, tight smile designer blazer, fresh off some panel about disruption culture, turned back to the crew and laughed. "Go back to your desk, honey," he said, like I was a secretary from a sitcom, not the person who had been holding this plant together longer than he'd been out of prep school. The floor guys looked at their boots. No one said a word. No one needed to. I already knew what I was to him, harmless, forgettable, beneath his radar. The worst part? I didn't even fight back. I just bent down, picked the damp paper from the gravel, wiped off the mud as best I could, and walked inside like nothing happened. But my ears were hot, my jaw tight, my hands didn't shake. Years of handling incident logs and hazardous material checklists had trained me well. But something was different this time. I could feel it in my ribs, in the way I didn't bother explaining myself anymore. I didn't chase validation. I didn't correct him when he said the override wasn't a real risk. I just went to my station, opened the original report, and resent it to the safety ops inbox. 4:57 p.m. PDF attached. Labeled timestamped, signed. And if you're still watching this, do me a favor. Tap like. Hit subscribe. 97% of folks don't, but it actually tells the team this story matters. That truth matters. That people like me, quiet, unpolished, not on the brochure, deserve to be heard too. Anyway, I logged out, grabbed my raincoat from the hook by the lockers, said goodnight to no one in particular. The sky outside was bruising into dusk. My car door creaked like always. The wipers made that scraping sound on dry glass until the rain finally caught up. I didn't go to dinner. Didn't call anyone. I just drove. Windows fogging, heart a knot, stomach sour. Somewhere between mile 3 and 4, I whispered to myself. I warned them. But warnings don't mean anything when no one listens. And men like Ryder, they don't read reports. They make decisions. They posture. They wave off protocols because they've never had to learn the cost of skipping them. They think real disasters only happen in case studies or overseas factories. They think women like me are just anxious overthinkers in steel-toed boots. The plant lights were a blur in my rearview mirror. The email had been sent. My job was done for the day. And 15 minutes later, something inside that building went violently, terribly wrong. I was folding laundry when the emergency alert lit up the corner of the TV screen. At first I didn't even look. Just some storm warning probably, or another chemical spill at one of the refineries further west. But then I heard the words containment breach and manufacturing fire, and I turned my head. There it was, our facility. My line. Line 3. I froze, half a towel still clutched in my hands. The camera footage was shaky, probably shot from someone's phone across the road. Grainy, full of glare. You could barely make out the building through the plumes of steam and flickering emergency lights, but I recognized it instantly. That was the south intake corridor. And the smoke, it was coming from the coolant trench. The exact one I flagged in the report. I stared at the screen like it had personally betrayed me. Not because it showed the accident, but because it proved I'd been right. And being right had never felt more wrong. A reporter's voice tried to cut through the chaos. No confirmed injuries at this hour, but production has halted across multiple lines as emergency crews respond. Sources estimate millions in equipment losses. I watched her speak, calm and composed under a yellow slicker, standing on ground I'd walked across every day for 10 years. I could still hear Ryder's voice in my head. Non-critical, he'd said. Overreacting. I wondered if he was watching too. If he was scrambling. If he was finally reading that PDF I'd sent just before 5. The shot cut to aerial footage. A fire engine backed into the loading bay. You could see teams moving in tight formation toward the smoke. From the angle, you could even spot the access panels where the override switch had been hardwired. The one I'd circled in red. The one they'd bypassed. I sat down on the edge of the couch, towel forgotten, eyes locked on the screen. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, dead still, as if moving might somehow break the illusion. But it wasn't an illusion. It was my worst-case scenario come to life, because someone had decided I was too cautious, too formal, too unimportant to take seriously, because a man in a suit wanted to look decisive in a room full of yes-men. My hands folded together, knuckles white. Somewhere inside me, a part of my professional soul caved in. Because the truth? I didn't want to be proven right like this. I didn't want validation at the price of scorched steel and emergency flares. But I also didn't want to be silent anymore. The phone buzzed next to me. A work notification. Facility incident log updated. No apology. No message. Just the sterile ping of bureaucracy lurching into motion. I turned the screen over face down. They were going to try to contain this. Spin it. Minimize. Maybe even erase the report entirely. I leaned back, stared at the ceiling and said nothing. But the anger had changed shape. It wasn't heat anymore. It was quiet, focused, heavy, and it wasn't going away. By the time I pulled into the parking lot the next morning, the front gate security team had tripled in size. That never happened, especially not on a Friday. 2 guys in jackets I didn't recognize were flipping through clipboards, muttering into radios. The badge scanner beeped slower than usual, like even the tech could feel the tension pulsing through the walls. I didn't get out right away. Just sat in my car and watched the smoke-stained windows of Building C reflect the sunrise like broken glass. Inside, no one was talking the way they usually did. Phones were ringing. Fast footsteps echoing. The usual morning banter over break room coffee had vanished. I walked through it like a ghost. No one greeted me. Not even Marla from compliance, and she never missed a beat. Something was happening behind the doors on floor 2. Something bad. 10 minutes later, a company-wide alert buzzed every terminal. Emergency briefing, conference room A, mandatory. I filed in like everyone else, found a seat against the wall, and folded my hands in my lap. Ryder was already at the head of the room. No tie today, collar wrinkled, jaw tight. His showman's energy was gone. In its place was a man barely holding himself together. The COO entered, looking like he hadn't slept. A legal team followed close behind, armed with folders, laptops, and expressions that could crack concrete. He went straight to the point. "We are in full operational lockdown until we understand what happened last night," he said, no preamble. "All safety reports from the last 72 hours need to be pulled and reviewed. Now." There was a pause. A long one. Then someone from IT piped up. "There's only one report timestamped before the incident. 4:57 p.m. yesterday. Submitted by Walsh." The CO blinked. "Who's Walsh?" I didn't move. Neither did anyone else. Legal leaned forward. "It's a flagged risk report about Line 3 thermal system override. Includes equipment photos, alert triggers, and a list of sign-offs. Only one name on the override approval." All eyes shifted to Ryder. He tried to speak, actually opened his mouth, but the general counsel cut him off. "Did you open the attachment?" she asked flatly. Ryder's voice cracked on the answer. I didn't think it was urgent." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard in that room. The COO looked like he'd swallowed glass. "You didn't read the one warning we had?" A junior analyst wheeled in a cart with printed logs. Ryder's unopened email sat on top, right there in black and white. Unread. Beneath it, the attachment. Safety_report_Walsh_0457.pdf. Timestamped. Archived. Ignored. I watched as the realization sank in. Not just that the failure could have been prevented, but that it had been flagged. Clearly. Calmly. Legally. And no one had acted. And suddenly, I wasn't the quiet girl in steel toes anymore. I was the only one who'd done her damn job. The COO took a long breath like he was trying not to explode. "Where is she now?" he asked. HR shifted awkwardly. "She hasn't clocked in." Legal looked up slowly. "Then she's the only thing standing between us and a federal investigation." And just like that, the whole room started moving. Frantic, confused, desperate. Because in the wreckage of arrogance, someone had finally remembered that I existed. They always scramble the same way. First comes the blame shifting, fast, frantic, sloppy. Ryder went straight into damage control, voice louder than necessary, trying to steer the room away from the truth before it settled like dust on every surface. "Look," he said, pointing at the wall screen where my report had been pulled up. "This isn't marked high priority. There's no red flag in the subject line." And she used cautious phrasing. "Potential risk. Recommend reinspection." It's not like she said imminent explosion. The CO didn't buy it. Neither did legal. You could feel the shift in the air, the slow deflation of Ryder's influence. The man who swaggered into town 3 months ago with TED Talk confidence and a car lease that screamed midlife crisis was suddenly a liability. Every word he said just dug the hole deeper. A compliance analyst, young guy, nervous, zoomed in on the metadata on the report. Timestamp checks out, he said, voice cracking slightly. Submitted 4:57 p.m. Includes 4 high-res thermal graphs. Progressive heat signatures across coolant intake points. And there's an email thread attached too. Everyone leaned in. The emails were internal. 3 names. One of them was mine. The other 2, Ryder. And a senior technician who'd pushed the override through under his verbal authorization. You could see it in black and white. Ryder's message. Just bypass it. Line can't go down before end of day. We'll review next week. Sent from his phone. 2 days before the explosion. The room went dead quiet again. The COO looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Legal just whispered. He protected them. And they ignored it. And that was it. The spin collapsed like wet cardboard. I wasn't in the room to watch it happen, but I didn't need to be. I could feel the panic from the silence. That's how you know they're scared. When the noise dies and the urgency turns inward, quiet and sharp. Ryder tried to interrupt again, claiming I'd been vague. That I'd flagged too many small things in past reports. She's a habitual escalator, he said. Makes mountains out of maintenance. But no one listened this time. Because a tech assistant, some intern barely old enough to drink, had found something else. A physical printout of my report. Mud-stained, crumpled, jammed into the corner near the security door by Building C. She held it up, shaking slightly as if it were radioactive. The cover page still had my initials on the bottom. The watermark showed it was the final submitted draft. Someone murmured, "Is this the one he tossed?" The room didn't answer. Didn't need to. Ryder's face told the whole story. That's when the COO stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just a slow, deliberate rise that sent a ripple down the table. "Get me every document she submitted in the past month," he said, low and cold. Everything with her name on it. No more smirks. No more buzzwords. Just suits and silence. The tide had turned. And I wasn't there to watch it crash. I'd already seen it coming. The first call came from HR. I let it go to voicemail. The second one came from an internal number I didn't recognize. Probably one of the project managers from floor 3 trying to sound casual. I didn't answer that one either. Then the text started coming. Just checking in. "Hey. Can we talk about yesterday's report? Urgent. Are you on site?" I stared at the screen, sitting cross-legged in my living room with a cold mug of coffee and a blanket that still smelled like detergent. I didn't reply. Not out of malice. Just out of clarity. They weren't calling because they wanted to listen now. They were calling because they were scared. Back inside HQ, I knew the panic had escalated when they called down to security. You don't activate building-wide search protocols unless legal is breathing down your neck. "Find her," the director of legal reportedly snapped. "We need direct verification of her report timestamp. Otherwise, our timeline collapses and we're exposed federally." I imagine the scene. A quiet radio call to the parking deck. A check at the badge logs. No record of entry. Then a full name echoing through the internal channel. Walsh. Ops Safety. Female. 5'7". Likely in navy jacket. I'd seen it happen before when OSHA came in unannounced. But this time I was the ghost they were chasing. They had no idea I'd already planned for this. Not because I anticipated disaster, but because habits are hard to break when you've lived through enough of them. The day before the explosion, after I finished the final edits on the report, I'd copied everything onto a small encrypted drive. Same one I always used. It wasn't even about covering my ass, it was just how I worked. Keep the record. Keep the receipts. If someone ever tries to erase the truth, you have a clean version. One that can't be wiped from the server when someone in a corner office starts panicking. I remember plugging in the drive, clicking and dragging the folder. Ryder_Varied. I'd labeled it. Not dramatic. Just specific. I'd added my thermal logs, photo timestamps, the equipment serials, Even a screenshot of the automated override notification that had flashed red for 2 seconds before disappearing off the shared network. I'd done it all like I always did, quietly, carefully, not to take anyone down, just to make sure the record stayed clean. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a weapon. It was just the truth. Unfiltered, unspun, and waiting if needed. They didn't understand that. They thought silence meant weakness. That leaving the building without a fight meant I'd walked away with my tail tucked. But they didn't know what it means to be ignored so often that you stop talking and just start preparing. And now they were flipping conference rooms upside down to find a woman they'd spent the last 6 months pretending wasn't in the room at all. Poetic in a way. I didn't need revenge. I had the archive. The boardroom felt like a morgue by the time the CEO stood up, sleeves rolled, hair disheveled, and said the words no exec ever wants to say out loud. Full internal probe. Effective immediately. His voice had that tight, reined-in panic I'd only ever heard once before. Back when a storage tank nearly imploded because someone had skipped a temperature check. But this wasn't a missed reading. This was policy negligence. Top down. Documented. And the only person who'd taken it seriously wasn't in the building anymore. Ryder, suddenly demoted from golden boy to walking liability, tried to chime in with some weak defense. Something about isolated oversight. But the COO cut him off with a look that could freeze coolant. Your access is suspended. Legal will walk you through the restrictions. That was it. No room for ego. No more buzzwords. He was done. PR had already pulled back from the morning's media round. You could feel the vacuum as the comms team scrambled to halt scheduled interviews and press briefings. All statements paused. All narrative control lost. Because no one knew what files I still had, or who might already be looking at them. And then came the moment that shifted everything. It was a small thing. Insignificant, almost. An executive assistant, new girl, still learning the difference between a hard hat and a grounding strap, walked into the safety office to grab spare forms for the probe. On the back of the supply cabinet door, half curled and stuck with yellowing tape, she found a sticky note. Just a square of paper. Nothing flashy. Just 7 words, written in my sharp block letters. I'll be home. You know where to find the files. The room fell dead silent when she read it aloud. The COO slowly lowered his glasses. Then he smiled. Not relief, just recognition. He left a map, he muttered. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't a threat. It was a breadcrumb. I knew they'd come looking eventually, not because I wanted them to, but because the truth always circles back when it's been ignored. And unlike Ryder, I didn't bluff. I documented. I filed. I labeled. My system was old school, redundant, and locked down tighter than their PR spin. The COO turned to legal. If we can verify her report against backup files offsite, we might limit the exposure. But only if she's cooperative. His voice dropped. We underestimated her. No one disagreed. At that moment, all their authority, titles, floors, salaries meant nothing. The one person who hadn't raised her voice, hadn't stormed out, hadn't played politics now held the high ground. And they knew it. I didn't have to kick down doors or grandstand to make them listen. All I had to do was tell the truth. And keep the receipts. The phone rang twice before I picked up. I already knew who it would be. Caller ID just said private. But the silence behind the ring was unmistakable. Legal, not PR. The kind of silence where every breath is measured, every word prepped. I let them sit in it for a moment before answering. This is Walsh. A voice I didn't recognize cleared his throat. Male mid-40s maybe. Nervous. Ms. Walsh, this is Derek from Internal Legal. We're hoping you can help clarify a few timeline discrepancies in yesterday's report. I let that hang in the air. Not out of spite, but because I wanted them to feel the difference between a desperate call and a collaboration. There are no discrepancies, I said calmly. The report was submitted at 4:57 p.m. It was flagged in 3 systems: Safety Ops, RiskNet, and Maintenance Override. Each log matches the others. Your VP didn't open it. The override was not authorized under policy. That's what you want confirmed, isn't it? He exhaled, not quite a sigh. More like the kind of sound someone makes when they realize their fire drill wasn't a drill at all. That's correct, yes. We're trying to understand the full scope of how this bypass was executed. And if I'm being transparent, who else may have signed off? You have everything you need, I said. I archived it in the shared directory yesterday afternoon. Folders labeled Rider Bypasses. Includes the report, email chains, screenshots of the override flag, thermal deltas, and the original risk entry with file hashes. There was a pause. Then muffled movement. He was clearly gesturing to someone nearby. Probably the general counsel. I could imagine the look on her face. They weren't used to this kind of control coming from someone without a title. Someone they'd always passed in the hallway without noticing. Would you be willing to come in? He asked carefully. Help us walk through your data with the COO? No need, I said. I've outlined everything in the archive index. Metadata is intact. Chain of custody is clean. If you need real-time access, it's mirrored to the encrypted drive in my desk drawer. Bottom drawer. Red tape on the handle. You'll need Marla from compliance to open it. She has the spare key. Another pause. This one longer. Finally. You really did document all of this. I didn't laugh. Didn't gloat. Just replied the only way I knew how. It's my job. They'd spent months mocking my redundant logs, my paranoid cross-systems backups, the way I color-coded risk thresholds like I was planning for the apocalypse. And now that the storm had hit, those exact habits were the only dry ground they had left. I heard soft voices in the background, someone reading off file names. Someone else saying, "It's all here. Everything." The man came back on the line. His voice sounded smaller now. "We appreciate your diligence, Ms. Walsh. Truly." I almost said, "I know." But instead I just said, "Good luck." Then I hung up. There was nothing left to say. The truth was already doing the talking. By Monday morning, Ryder's name had vanished from the internal directory. No memo. No goodbye email. Just a missing profile photo and a permissions lockout that told the rest of the company everything they needed to know. But it didn't stay quiet for long. A leaked screenshot made its way across the internet faster than wildfire. My report, time-stamped and intact, side by side with a still from the incident feed. Coolant plume rising, red lights flashing, emergency sirens mid-blare. Underneath the images, someone had captioned it simply. She told them. That was all it took. The internal memo followed 2 hours later. It was supposed to stay confidential, of course, but we all know how that goes. VP knowingly bypassed standard risk protocol despite filed objection. Immediate administrative leave, enacted pending external review. The words were sterile as expected. But the subtext rang loud. He'd gambled, and now the company was holding the bill. Then the regulators came. Environmental safety and manufacturing integrity. Their badges scanned in with grim expressions and clipboards that didn't leave their sides. They weren't asking open-ended questions. They were cross-referencing, checking logs, asking about intent. This wasn't a slap-on-the-wrist audit. This was an investigation. PR tried to get ahead of it. But nothing sticks when the image everyone remembers is your own VP laughing as a report is tossed into the mud. By noon, internal morale had cratered. No one said Ryder's name out loud. But you could feel the collective shift. Conversations got quieter. Eyes darted more often. And the usual hierarchy had gone foggy. Managers started reviewing documentation habits. Engineers double-checked read receipts. Every whisper sounded like the start of a new protocol. Then the COO spoke. It wasn't at a podium. It wasn't even a formal press conference. Just a quiet, somber email, sent to every inbox in the company at 1:26 p.m. No flair. No branding. Just a subject line that read, "Failure and responsibility." The body was short. Brutally honest. Protocols exist for a reason. To protect people, systems, and trust. We failed to uphold them. One employee didn't. She documented what others dismissed. She acted with integrity. We didn't listen. And now we will. He didn't name me. He didn't have to. The whole building knew. I read it on my phone, sitting at the same table where I'd eaten alone the day after I was told to go back to my desk. Same seat. Same view. Different world. There was no fist pumping. No parade. Just a breath. Long measured. Like I'd finally come up for air after holding it through months of being second-guessed and overlooked. I wasn't their hero, but I was the one person they couldn't ignore anymore. And for the first time in years I didn't feel small. The chairs in the auditorium creaked like old bones as the staff shuffled in. most of them still unsure if this was just another HR formality or something bigger. A week had passed since the fire, 7 long days of damage reports, suspended projects, regulator walkthroughs, and a silence that hung heavy over every hallway. Most people hadn't seen Ryder since the morning of the lockdown. Rumors swirled. Some said he'd lawyered up. Others claimed he was trying to cut a deal to save his severance. But the truth didn't need a headline anymore. It had already spread, whispered one screenshot at a time, carved into the rhythm of the office like a new pulse. The projector clicked on. Slides scrolled past, loss estimates, next phase protocol updates, insurance impact summaries. Then it happened. Mid-slide. Quiet and matter-of-fact. Ryder's name disappeared from the org chart. No red line, no flashing animation. Just gone. Replaced with a vacant interim pending. Not a murmur in the room. Just the faint sound of someone typing in the back row. Then I walked in. Not late, just timed. The doors at the side of the auditorium let out a soft hiss, and I stepped through, clipboard in hand. No spotlight. No applause. Just a few glances from people who had once looked past me like I was a filing cabinet. Now they stared like I was holding the building up by its beams. The COO saw me enter and paused. He didn't gesture dramatically. He just gave a small firm nod and said, "Let's fix this." Then he turned back to the screen. That was it. No promotion. No plaque. No shiny new title or company-wide ovation. Just work to be done, and the unspoken agreement that I wasn't to be second-guessed again. After the meeting, I walked past the safety board, the same one that used to collect dust behind a forgotten hallway printer. A new sign had been printed and pinned above it. Bright white paper. Large black letters. No logos. Just words. If it's 4:57 p.m. and Walsh is emailing, you read it. I stared at it for a second, not because I needed validation, but because it was the first time they'd built a rule around listening instead of ignoring. And then I walked past. Not slower. Not faster. Just steady. Ready. I didn't want power. Just respect. And a dry place for the truth to land.